Um, we're lucky to have Ted in town. He happens to be over from San Francisco. He came up with the bright idea of building out Jobscience on the Salesforce platform over 10 years ago. Salesforce, obviously the largest CRM in the world, the fourth biggest software company in the world. And Ted has built Jobscience to be the most successful recruitment platform on Salesforce. So we're delighted to have him in town. I'm going to hand it straight over to him.
Great, thanks. Hopefully the audio will be okay here. So I've got a funny accent, if you haven't noticed. But I'm an attorney in the United States, which means I can't provide you any legal advice here in the UK. But what we did is we met with Helen about, 6 or 7 months ago, and we had a couple-hour session where we went through kind of all the fundamentals of GDPR, because we keep getting calls from our clients where they're asking, well, what are you doing about GDPR? Like, aren't you going to solve it for me? Like, isn't there a button I push and it just goes away? Isn't it like Microsoft plug and play? Yeah, it's just like Microsoft plug and play. It doesn't work that way. So what we thought we would do is come up with 6 steps that our customers could use and walk you through that. And it fits very nicely with Comply GDPR, and also fits very nicely with EBSTA. And I think what was so interesting in what Guy was talking about is that EBSTA is really covering your email, which is your Achilles heel of all your privacy processes. And that's so important when you look at your CRM. And I was in Germany about 8 years ago with McKinsey, one of our customers. And there was an East German woman who asked me a lot of weird questions. But one of her questions was about how we kept data, and there were these data rules in Germany that you had to get the data on the system. I said, wow, that's lemonade. She's like, what do you mean by this lemonade? And I was like, well, these lemons the government's given you is like an excuse to find out who in your database you can actually talk to and force you to get the ones you can't talk to out of your database. Your recruiters are going to save so much time because they're not going to call people who they can't reach. Oh, I see. And so it was a really good starting experience, I think a precursor of where we are. So anyway, when I'm in the United States, I always pull up this slide because no one in the US actually knows what this is. And your American clients, by the way, have no clue how up the creek they are. So one of the things you could do from a marketing perspective to make more money and to make GDPR lemonade is to start reaching out to all your customers who are not in the EU, saying, we've got a plan, we can sit down with you, we can talk about your European recruitment, you really need to understand this, because those American recruiters you have just don't get it. They don't understand how much risk you're about to face, how the world is about to end. Amazon, how could you work with an American firm? They're not going to protect you. I keep going around to all the Americans saying, if you take one candidate from the EU, you could potentially be liable. Oh my God, it's the end of the world. So that's why we use this global map. Now it turns out that you should probably be looking at what the Koreans and the folks in Singapore and the folks in Australia are doing, in Canada, and there are all these other laws that you're probably subject to, but just generally having this in your portfolio, especially when you go sit down with clients to explain that you understand their world, puts you at a great advantage, because most people in corporate HR don't really understand anything besides sending a candidate to their managers. Okay, that's why you guys are all in recruitment. They wouldn't need you if they understood all these things. So the big death date that no one's looking forward to. And I think Helen did a great job of explaining the risk, so I'm not going to talk about that. So what's our compliance strategy? Well, first off, we have an approach that we're going to walk you through. But the first thing I want you to ask yourself is, who are the intended users of your compliance process? Because I think most people have been talking about the candidates, right? But actually, one of your intended user bases are your own employees. Because if you build all these policies out, but you don't have a process to make sure that they're acknowledging the policies, you're in big trouble. So what is your communication strategy to your own employees? That's one of the things you have to have square in the next 55 days. And what's your communication strategy to your customers? And again, how do you make that communication strategy lemonade, not lemons? If they're sending you forms to fill out, I can tell you as an attorney that's called burden shifting. They believe that if you fill out the form, somehow you're responsible for the problem and you're going to have to accept the burden as opposed to them accepting the burden. The way you get in front of the burden shifting is to explain to them what's going on and give them a strategy for what they can do about it. Okay? So I'm going to walk you through our intended users. I'm going to walk you through our model. In terms of legitimate interest, you really have to determine what your own standard for legitimate interest is. And there's a bunch of new stuff that Salesforce has built. We're built on the Salesforce platform to make your job a little easier. And we're here, it's March 5th, so we've already hit the upcoming date. So what's our approach? First off, all the information in your system is your content. What do I mean by that? You control the data, it's your content. There's no one who can come in from outside and fix that problem for you. Second piece is enablement. What are you doing to enable all these different users, whether they're outsiders, insiders, whoever they are, to be in compliance? And the third is, what's your structure? So how are you organized? So how many of you have someone who's the designated go-to person for your business for data protection? Okay. Is that person also in charge of info security? InfoSec? Does someone have someone different who does data privacy and another person does InfoSec? And then who's in charge of human resources? Same person? Okay. Well, those three people probably should get together because they're all going to be part of the solution. Okay? If the InfoSec and HR people think it's your problem, you have to go solve it, you got 55 days to educate them as to how it's our problem. Okay? Now, what I usually do when I talk about the structure is walk through who the users are. So, your employees are the most important users of the system because they're your front line. If they do things wrong, you're going to pay fines. The beauty of EBSTA is that you can decrease the risk of your employees making bad decisions by having a lot of automation. And that automation can also demonstrate that you're making a solid effort at trying to be compliant. But if you don't have that employee strategy, all your other strategies are going to go wrong. And that's why you need to go to your HR people and say, okay, HR, we're going to pull you into this because it's your job to go make sure that everyone acknowledges our policy. That's our job. Yeah, that's your job. How about your contractors? Are your contractors covered by your HR? Are they covered by your InfoSec? Who are they covered by? Because they might be participants in the process. Because what if they're taking information on your behalf from clients in the role they have? Does that somehow extend liability to you? It might. That's part of what you need to review. So who else? We have third parties. Third parties. That's the customers, the people who pay the bills. Then we've got a compliance manager. I think even if you don't have a data protection officer, your business should have someone who's in charge of compliance. Whether it's taking the HR person, the InfoSec person, someone needs to be the compliant day-to-day go-to. Oh my God, we just got a letter saying we're fine. Who should we call? Ghostbusters, no. We need to call. See, I'm trying to make compliance fun. It is really hard. Okay? But you need to have someone who's the go-to. You also need to have someone who's not the compliance manager, who watches the compliance manager, who once in a while is like, okay, once every quarter we're going to have a meeting to see if the compliance manager is actually doing their job. Because the worst thing you can do in the world of compliance is have someone who's managing it who doesn't manage it, who then you get audited and it realizes no one was paying attention to what was going on. Then you're probably going, oh my God, that American's suggesting that we hire all these people to do all these different things. These are not all full-time jobs. These are just roles or personas that people need to play so that you can get on top of your game. So who else do we have? A policy author. And you're going to understand in a second why you need to have a policy author. But someone who actually writes down what the policy is. Usually your policy author might want to be, I don't know, a consultant like Helen, or it might be a lawyer, not me because I'm not a lawyer here, but a lawyer, someone who has expertise that goes beyond the day-to-day expertise that are skilled in the art of what you're talking about. Now, once you have that policy author, you probably want someone who's the policy publisher. That might be an executive or a team of executives who make a decision that this is a policy we're going forward with and we're going to notify our employees about it. Now this sounds a lot like a lot of BS, right? Especially if you're like a recruiter and your job's recruiting. Why do we need to have policies? Why does someone need to do compliance? Because you are in the business of risk management. Everyone's in the business of risk management. And your customers are going to try and make you assume the risk. You're going to try and see if you can get your customers to accept the risk, but someone's going to accept some level of risk. And your insurers, if you have business insurance, are going to try and make you assume the risk, because if you don't have these policies and processes in place, they're going to say that you're probably negligent or you weren't doing your job, so therefore they can't cover you if the issue ever comes up. And I'm not sure if GDPR compliance can be treated like fraud, but there are certain things that your policies just won't cover you for at all. So I'd suggest in the next 55 days, maybe like right when you get back to your office, is to call up your insurer and see what type of coverage you have for privacy complaints, what type of InfoSec policies you have, and how are they covering you for GDPR. Because not having that insurance or not having coverage in your business because it's a new topic could open up a great deal of personal liability. Everyone following me so far? It's greed and fear. We're on the fear part. Greed was a lemonade. We're going back to the lemons for a second. Okay? So what did we do at Jobscience? First off, we came up with this data model that's built around policies. And it asks you to start defining what your policies are. And the beauty of what Helen's doing is she's got all these pre-written policies that all you have to do is basically look at her policy and say, oh, maybe we edited a little, maybe that's good. You can bulk, if she puts her policies in an Excel spreadsheet, you can just bulk upload those policies right into the system. Okay? Now, the policy is going to track the process of how you approve the policy. So here's our policy. You can set up a workflow to get all the sign-offs in your organization of everybody who's got to approve that, so that you can show an auditor. Here's what's universally consistent with auditing and compliance. When an auditor comes, you want to produce so much BS for them to have to read through that in a 4-hour day they work, they will decide there's somewhere easier to go steal from. You know, why do we have bike locks? This is our American approach. Oh, the IRS is coming. Oh, yes, we have piles of stuff for you to read. Oh, my God, I'll just go somewhere else. It's like across the street where they're freaked out and they'll just pay me. So I would strongly suggest that you figure out lots of ways to create lots of data. Because the more data that you're producing, the better off you'll be. Then, what do you do when someone breaks a policy? Corrective action. Do you have a system for reporting your corrective action? So let's just walk through an example. Employee Bob is busy violating our policies. Joe knows that Bob is breaking the policies, and he goes, hey Bob, what's the deal here? Oh, I didn't realize I was violating the policies. Well, that's where you want to record a violation of the policy. And then you're like, what are we going to do? Are we going to fire him? Are we going to admonish him? Are we going to clean it up? We want to record what we did about it. Because I guarantee you, someone in your business is going to violate. Has anyone ever had anyone in your business violate the policy? Some policy, okay? If you let them violate the policy and you don't record what you do about it, then you're going to have compliance come in and say, we're not giving you any credit for having the policy because no one follows the policy. A pattern of not following the policy is considered negligence. You go back and look at your director and officer policies, your insurance policies, they'll probably not cover you if you have a pattern of ignoring your policies because you're not practicing best business judgment. Okay? This is why I don't practice law anymore. So, where do we go from here? The policy is the center of the compliance universe. So Jobscience has built a program that's free for all of our customers, free for customers to use our forms product and our recruiting products, where you build your policies and you start defining what your policies are. And then hanging off your policies are something called model terms. Now, what are model terms? Your model term might be the statement you put on your website. It might be the term that you put in your contract. It would be those terms that you want to use consistently in all of your materials, because what you don't want is a situation where you write up a policy, you define what your contract language is going to be, and then you let Jimmy, he's the guy who sort of is your slick sales guy who doesn't like to pay attention to the rules, write up his own contract. Okay? Because Jimmy will put you in a lot of trouble. Okay? So you want to have these model terms so that you have something that you're constantly enforcing. If Jimmy, by the way, does do one of those things, what do we want to do? We want to record a violation and what we did about it. Because when the auditors come in and you're like, okay, well, I can produce a report for you, I can show you what we did, what date we did it on, I've got this great EBSTA product, we've been removing everyone from our system who we don't have a legitimate interest in, we've got it down. Then you can also now do what? We're going to go back to the lemonade side of the house. You can start building PowerPoint slides to explain to your customers how you've got the best standards, the top practices, that you're on top of it, and then when their choice is to go work with the new place Jimmy works, you know, the Slack Shack where no one follows the rules, or to work with you, the person who's got your act together, which way do you think they're going to want to go? So you got to take the lemons and make the lemonade. Now, what do we have besides policy? We have requests. So the beauty of Salesforce is these things called communities, they're portals. So you can create a community for job seekers who want to request their information. You can create a community for employers who want to request information. You can create an intranet for your own employees to acknowledge your policies and to go to those policies and be able to read them. When an outsider or a third party comes and wants to make a request, those requests come in the system. They're not a violation, but when someone makes a request, what do we record? An action to show that we actually did something about what they requested. Now, I don't think you're going to be inundated with 50,000 people one afternoon making all these requests, but you need that policy manager or that compliance manager to say, oh, a request came in, I actually did something with it and I recorded what I did. And if the person you're putting in the compliance manager role doesn't have sort of the proclivity to record things they do, please find a different compliance manager. Okay? Or if you know that's not you, go find someone else in your business to do this job. Okay? Don't trick yourself, because it's a really expensive, little swat you'll get if it doesn't work. Now, what else do we have besides policy? We have the violations, we cover those. We have actions, we cover those. We have audits. What is an audit? I might build a policy, and I want to set up in my policy that we check the policy every 180 days. So I set a task that 180 days from now, I'm going to review the policy, and when I do that, I click a button called I audited the policy. An audit could be as simple as it's 180 days, I look at it, it's still there, I'm moving on. But when that auditor comes in, the compliance auditor, they're like, well, are you auditing your policies? Yes, of course, 180 days, it's checked off, we did it. Here's the report, enjoy. Now, where I'm going with this is you could also have simple audits, like I'm an employee and I go to the compliance portal to say that I've been given access to the policy to review, and I click the button and it records a self-audit. On March 5th, Ted Elliott self-audited himself and reported that he's read our policies. Now I have a list of all these policies that are going on. Now what we've done in the background, just because we want to have one extra level of reports to give to people that are nonsense, that confuse the crap out of them, we have logs. So every time you take an action in the compliance system, it creates a log record that just inserts a record. So if a compliance auditor comes in and they're like, well, what about activities have you had? Here's the log. Why are all these fields encrypted? Oh, they're all encrypted because it's private information that we can't provide you unless you can show us why we should give it to you. Oh my God, this is like the worst spike lock I've ever found. I'm gonna go steal someone else's bike. So we're trying to give you layers and rows of things to give people who want answers, because our guess is they're probably just as confused about what GDPR is also, and so the ability to define what a best practice is puts you on as a leader. I always say best practices are whatever I say they are, until someone questions me as to whether that's the best practice. And so I think in this area of compliance where no one really knows what the best practices are, being a first guesser is right now a stronger position than being a second guesser. So, where do we go from here? Just get the clicker to click. Model terms. We talked about model terms, we've explained what they are. Does anyone not know what a model term is? This is a great time to ask me, Ted, what's a model term if you don't know what a model term is.
What's a model term?
A model term is going to be something you put on your website. This is our contractual language when you use our website, like a privacy policy. A model term would be your privacy policy that you might also use in your contracts with your customers. Anytime you have an agreement, you want to use the same language repeatedly over and over, or define why your language is different depending on where the person's coming from, so you can demonstrate that you have a repeatable process and you're consistent. It's consistency and compliance is godliness, whoever your God is, okay? Now, requests. What are requests? They're when someone comes to my website, they can fill in a request. What I probably want to have within my request process, and this is built into Jobscience, is something that acknowledges that I reviewed the request, that I researched the request, and then I acted on the request. Because just having requests come in that no one looks at, like resumes when people apply for jobs and no one really looks at them, that works fine in recruiting, I guess. But it doesn't work so well when someone's making a compliance request to ask that their information be removed, or that they want to update their information, or that they would like to just see what information you have on them. Violations, my favorite. Violations are showing that internally you have someone who's paying attention, that if someone comes to them anonymously and says, I think that Joey and Jimmy got together last night when they were wasted and they were looking at people's personal phone numbers and crank calling them, what did they do? Yeah, I just made up that one as we were going along. I thought it was kind of interesting. That's probably a violation of our policy. That's not what we call legitimate interest, crank calling people at midnight when we're wasted. And don't do that, okay? So, then we've got actions. Actions are, what do we do to actually fix the problem? And the actions are probably the most important thing that you can record in the system, because people are going to make mistakes. How many people believe that you can live in a mistake world? That there's no mistakes possible in the world, that you can be perfect? It's impossible. So what we need to do is not build for a world that doesn't exist, but design for a world that exists, and let auditors are humans too. Oh yeah, if this happened, We did this immediately, we were able to act on it, we were able to solve the problem, there was no harm done, great. What they don't want to hear is, oh, there's no problems here. No problems, just don't make eye contact, no problems, right? You know, when you talk to your kids and they like can't stop smiling because you know you caught them. That's sort of like how the auditors operate. You're making me laugh, Dad, don't do that. So the audits are simply recording that someone is doing something to double check information. All these things need to be defined by you and your consultant. So where I would bring in Helen and apply GDPR, or I bring in my attorneys, is to say, what is our audit standard going to be? What is our, what's our infrastructure or our process going to be? Do we have our policies defined? What should our model terms be? You don't need to have 10,000 model terms. You don't have to have 500 policies. I mean, people are like, oh, we have to have policies. We'll just start drafting policies. I would go with the bare minimum number of policies and the bare minimum number of model terms you need and go as light as possible, but have the infrastructure there to support whatever your needs actually are. But you really do need to talk to someone from outside your organization who can come in and give you some tips. And if they already have books of these policies defined, it's probably much simpler to go through and say, yeah, we're going to adopt these 7 or 8 or 12 policies. Let's load them in the system, we're done. How are you now going to enforce them? Okay? Is this helpful so far in terms of just what I did is I get a lot of questions about info security, and I get lots of questions about this GDPR stuff, and it's basically a compliance module. It doesn't matter what type of policy you're doing, it's the same process. You define what your rule is. We call it in the United States, we call it IRAC method, issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. What's my issue? What's the rule I'm applying to the issue? How, if I apply the rule to the issue, I can analyze that I get to the conclusion I want. Very simple, sort of legalistic approach. So, but boring for everyone who didn't go to law school, so I apologize for the IRAC method. So, then you've got the logs that we talked about, but what I thought I'd do is talk about legitimate interest for a second. So, we think that a tool like EBSA is a great way to track legitimate interest, because we don't think anyone knows what legitimate interest actually is. But there's a couple things that could probably indicate we don't have a relationship with someone. Their email bounces. Their email bounces 6 times in a row. There's probably a pretty good sign we don't know how to email that person anymore. Now, does that mean we delete them from our database? Maybe the owner should get an email alert themselves saying, this person has bounced 6 times, you have 24 hours to call them and confirm they're still alive, or mark them for removal. If that's too much of a burden, you're going to have to use a bulk tool to do it, and then have a way to go back to the bulk tool and recover that information. I think you'll be shocked by how many people you can remove from your database that no one will even notice they were removed. They'll start being like, wow, it's a lot easier to use the search because all the candidates are actually there when I call them. Wow. So bounces is a real easy thing to look at. Have we touched them? Have we modified their record? Have we done anything? So we built a little trigger into the system that says, if there's a record you haven't modified or touched, we're going to create a legitimate interest alert to force you to go take a look at that record or ignore it, to your desire, so that you're constantly feeding up to the top of your list of people that you're not dealing with. Now, what's the purpose there? It's to get people to engage the database. GDPR is the single greatest thing for Jobscience ever. Want to know why? It's going to actually force recruiters to have to look at their data. It's probably the best thing ever happened to EBSTA, because it's going to force owners of data to figure out how all their different data systems connect, because if they don't, they could have massive liability. And it's actually the greatest thing ever for your business, because it's actually going to force you to use the one thing you have besides your time, which is your data, to create value. Because right now, most recruiting firms are professional service businesses where the only value you have is the time you're spending. You all think your databases are worth a lot. They would be if you actually looked at them, but they're not all that valuable if people don't use them. This is actually going to force those actions, and that could be actually a big, big lemonade for you. It just doesn't feel that way right now. It kind of feels like lemons. Okay? So, what else do I have to show you? Does anyone here use Salesforce? Salesforce users? Does anyone know what Trailhead is? You don't need to be a Salesforce user to use Trailhead. If you go to Salesforce Trailhead, they have these things called badges or trails. You can be a trailblazer. There's a 15-minute course you can take on GDPR online. It will walk you through all the keywords. It will explain it to you. It's written for a 3rd grader. I know because I asked my 3rd grader to go through it with me. Okay, and she's like, no, Dad. So even though it's written for a 3rd grader, it's understandable for all of us. And I would strongly suggest that you take a look at it. Even if you're not a Salesforce user, it's something good, it's something helpful, and it will explain to you a lot of the terminology used around this. And even the best thing before you go talk to a consultant or a lawyer is to know what the terminology is so that you're not spending hours spinning your wheels, okay? What they've done in Salesforce is they've gone through and said, hey, these are certain fields in our system, and we're gonna make those fields protectable. And the reason they're gonna do that is it's not GDPR compliant that they're just worried about. There's really 3 types of compliance that they have to follow. There's Canadian. So the Canadians have these crazy laws about email where you're not supposed to can spam. Anyone ever heard of can spam? That's Canadian spam law. Can spam. It's not just a new type of spam. It's not a Monty Python skit. Then there's something called Graham Leach, which is part of the US compliance. The good news there is that we have this president who doesn't really believe in laws, so there won't be any compliance issues at least for another 3 years in the United States. We get rid of 2 laws for every new law that we create, which is actually pretty cool. But all the other stuff he does is kind of nuts. And then you've got GDPR, right? And so Salesforce had to come up with a regimen for how you tag your data. That actually used to be called drag and tag. How you tag your information and code your information. Back in the days, apparently it means something horrible in the United States, so they changed the name. But we won't go there. Main point I'm trying to make here is that Salesforce has been trying to think about what fields, what information do we need to protect, and how do we protect it. And so what you're able to do now in Salesforce is go in and tag out what's personal data, how do you want to package that data, what are your delete record rules going to be, how do you handle solicitations. The Germans would probably be very concerned about whether you have geolocation turned on to see where they're located, because that freaks them out, okay? 50 years in a police state, I guess you get a little freaky. Maybe it was more like 100 years, but anyway, then you've got what types of fields can you actually tag? So on top of Jobscience building out sort of a policy manual in the system, in effect, that has a compliance system, there are a whole series of pieces of data that you can tag for treatment so that if a compliance auditor comes in, you can say, we've got policies and we've got privacy records and we've got systems for managing all this in our system. And the beauty of the Salesforce platform is there are companies that are much bigger than you are, that have much bigger risk than you have, that are operating in Europe, and Salesforce is their system of record for their personnel data, their people data, their customer data, and they have to set up those folks for success. So one of the benefits we get at Jobscience is we might build a great policy compliance system, but Salesforce is building a complete GDPR platform that will make you even better off, okay? So I think I've got a couple more fun things. Where do we start? Because I've been throwing out all this lemon lemonade stuff. I'm even confused about what that's all about, okay? So what's the first step? Define and provision your participants. Write down a little piece of paper, who in our organization is actually going to touch what we do in GDPR. Our employees, our management, one of our lawyers, maybe we're going to employ HR into it. Who are those people going to be? Because if you don't have an agenda of who's going to be involved with it, you're going to end up carrying all the load, and when 55 days hits and something goes wrong, everyone else is going to act like it wasn't their problem. So it's time to bring everybody into the tent. But first, define the tent. The second thing I'd recommend is to review policies and then enable those policies by communicating them. And that's where you bring in some like Comply GDPR, or you bring in your law firm, but you really need to review what are we trying to do, what policies are enforceable, what will work for our business, what won't work for our business, what risks are we willing to accept, and what is our insurance policy going to cover? Most of you have business insurance, right? So then after I've kind of defined what we feel comfortable getting away with, I then have to define the policies. Okay? Essential. Then I define my model terms. But I should not define my model terms until I define my policies, because my model terms should branch from my policies. Create an employee community. What do I mean by that? Create on your intranet if you don't have one, or build an intranet with employee communities, something Jobscience sells. Create something where your employees can go in and they can get access to policies and they can acknowledge they've seen them. Is what you really want to be able to do by the 55 days from now, is you want to be able to say, Every one of our employees has acknowledged our policies, understands what our policies are, and has agreed to live by those policies. But you can't on day 55 drop 55 pages worth of documentation on someone's desk and say, yeah, we're covered. So right now you should be setting the dates for when you're having an all-company webinar or an all-company event where you're making this available to people so they can sign off, that they've been informed. I then say you want to create a consumer or a publicly facing web page or website, which is how we care about privacy, where you can go to read the model terms about how you cover privacy, which is where you can go to request your information, which is where you can go to interact with your business, because that's how you can start defining how people interact with you. If you don't have this, then they can send you an email or they can do a spam campaign against you. But if you have a website where you find this is how you communicate to us about privacy, this is our privacy policy and our model terms. If you have an issue with privacy, this is the way that we adjudicate those privacy issues, then you can start defining some of the rules. But if you have no standards and no process, then you are subject to whatever the jungle dictates. So, just in the interest of time, I'm going to pop through some of these slides because I think I'm a little too slow. But this gives you an example of what the policies will look like. Okay? So I'm in the system, I go through and I define a policy. And I have my request, my model terms, my violations, and my audits there. See where it says contact a consultant? That's where you could hit up Helen. But here I'm going to edit my policy, define my policy, and there's little boxes that tell you what each one of those things are when you're filling it out. You really shouldn't fill in a lot of these. You should sit down with a consultant, get an Excel spreadsheet, say these are the fields we need to fill out, so you can bulk upload all the policies at one time. If you're going to have lots of them. If you're going to have 5 or 6, you can do it manually. Okay? So, a model term, very simple. What's the name of the term? What's the type of policy that's tied to? And what language are you using the model term? It's simply usually a paragraph that defines something you stick in the contract. Get out of here. What's a community? A community, basically, we have community templates. You can say, I want to build an intranet. I want to build a public site. You click on it. It builds you a little microsite where people can go to. You can put your own branding on it. But you're putting somewhere on your website people can go to request whatever they need to request from you. And communities aren't just for external people. You can build communities for internal people like an intranet. So here's an example where we've created an internal community for our employees where they can see our model terms, our policies, any files or documents we want to share with them related to GDPR. Their picture can come up with all their information in your system, and they can self-audit. And when they self-audit, it simply says, I recognize we have policies, they've been given to me, I've had an opportunity to review them, peace out, drop the mic. So, the consumer community, this doesn't have a lot of branding to it, but there's 3 buttons. The 3 buttons are the 3 types of requests that they can make under GDPR. And when they fill out one of those request forms, I know the graphics are horrible, so you just have to close your eyes and imagine that's what's there. When they click that, it automatically creates a request in your system, kicks off a workflow to your team to do something. So here's an example where someone could use their mobile phone, and if they decide they didn't want to have their information in your system anymore, they could go in and make a GDPR request right from their mobile phone using your community. And they can request to update their information, or they could request to have their information removed, and or to be forgotten. That's the one. What information they have in file, and really all you're doing is creating a simple interactive form they can go to make that request, so that you can respond to them. It can be tied directly to their website. There's not a whole lot to it, but once they fill that form out, and my video's running, here we go. They put in comments. It's going to come into your system on the back end, and whoever your compliance manager is going to see that and then be able to act on it. And I really think that's the important idea I want to get across to everybody, is just going and listening to a couple of hours of what GDPR is great, but you need to get an action plan because we're down to 55 days. And the fines are really big. And it doesn't mean that you have to have a fortress that is impenetrable. You just need to have a couple walls, and they can't be made of hay. So when the big bad wolf comes, he's going to blow that house down if it's not at least got a firm foundation. Now the way you get that foundation is to find what are we going to do about it, how much time do we have to do something about it, And how can we create something that looks stronger than the guy across the street who did nothing? Because he's going to go to a couple houses first before he comes to your house, and he's going to blow them down. But when he comes to your house, you want to at least be using bricks so that you have something that's defendable. What's different about your business than everyone else? We work really hard. Well, so far I've never gone to a roofing firm where their pitch is, we don't work very hard. We're the slackers. If you really want it done, we'll get it done next week. That's not their pitch, okay? Really. But if your pitch is, we're a very mature organization, we take privacy seriously, we take relationships seriously, we take people seriously, and we want to show you our commitments. You know, every Salesforce event I ever have gone to, they start off with how they're helping a charity or they're helping a foundation or they're helping someone. They're really doing that to establish their credence as good people, and then they're showing you their product. If you show people that privacy matters, does privacy matter to you guys? Do you care if anyone has all your information? Okay? It probably matters to your customers. It certainly matters to the candidates. I usually find privacy matters to people who have the least amount of things to worry about, because those people who have the most to worry about already know they have no privacy. But we still need to do it. So here, someone's filled out something online, I've got to take action on it, and it's all kind of in one system. So I'm going to stop there because I think you guys have been a great audience today, and you've listened to 3 hours of GDPR. By the way, we'll be pulling out fingernails in the room over there after we scratch the chalkboards, just to make sure everyone's still awake. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer it. But we want you to know that we're committed to giving you the tools to do the job, not to borrow Winston Churchill. And we really want you to be effective, and we want you to be successful, because we know our successful clients are growing. And that's important to us, and it's certainly important to them. Thank you so much for your time.